Hi, CAA Facebook fans. We are down at the 2019 Learning Weekend in Sarasota, Florida, and we are visiting Prospect Stables with Bob Longstaff, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about this vehicle.
This carriage is a George IV Phaeton, and it gets its name from King George IV, who had the misfortune to have really serious gout, and it prevented him from mounting a lot of the taller carriages that he liked to drive. So a carriage builder came up with this vehicle with a low slung body, and the original George IV for him was much lower down, so he could easily step in and out without hitting his gout foot on the carriage. And then later on it became the preferred carriage for a lady to drive. And in my opinion, it's probably the most elegant carriage a four-wheeler a lady can drive. She sits back, way back from the horses, so there's no muck or dirt getting thrown up out of this large curved dash. And a livery groom would sit in the back seat. Now with the George IV, the reins are much longer than you would have with a normal pair vehicle, because she's further back from the front of the carriage, so the reins have to be several feet longer. And not only that, when she arrives at her destination, if she decides she's getting out of the carriage, what she could do, or she was tired of driving, she'd hand the reins back to the groom sitting further back here, so the reins have to come all the way back, reach all the way to the back of the carriage on a George IV, which is different than most other carriages. And then the hood, if the weather was inclement, the hood would go up, and then there's a rain apron which is fixed to the front boot, or sorry, not the front boot, the dash, and it unbuckles and it would fold out, and it's got little grommets where the tabs would hook into on the side, and then also on the inside of the carriage hood there's another grommet, not visible on this one unfortunately, where it would also hook onto, and that prevents any rain from coming onto the driver and the passenger, and they remain clean and dry. So that's basically a George IV thing.
And do we know who made this one?
This is supposedly made by Peters of London. It's what they call a Peters style, because it sits up higher than a lot of Brewsters or some other George IVs. There were so many different manufacturers that did their own type or style of a George IV. But a lot of them, and if you look at their records, they would say Kimball, they would say, build a George IV Phaeton in the Peters style, and that means this style where it sits up higher off the ground. A little bit more elegant, a little bit more airy. Now, a pair of horses for a lady, or a single horse for a lady to drive, was usually between 14.3 and 15.1. And the reins were always on the top bar, not on the cheek, but on the top bar of the bit. The idea being a lady being of the weaker sex didn't have the strength of a man, so the reins would be bitted down on the top bar, so it would be easier for her to drive.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Is there any other detail that you would like to share with us?
If the lady had a parasol or an umbrella, it would sit in the fold of the hood here.
Ah. And so we had a question about a rain rail on the dash. Is that normal, or?
Depends on the manufacturer. This lovely sweeping curve on the dash, it's just the right height, so the reins would not touch. But on some carriages, they came up at a more acute angle, and they would have a metal rain rail, so the rain would slide over without touching the pattern.
Fantastic.
And this carriage can also be used with a single horse. You unbolt the splinter bar, take the splinter bar off, and then the swan neck shaft, one would go on this side, one on that side, bolt in, and the swan neck shafts are independently pivoted.
Fantastic.
And that's the most elegant carriage for a lady to drive. And many, many years ago, if people look back at the horse shows before the Second World War, you would see 10, 12 of these in a class for singles and pairs, and usually with a hackney horse.
Wow. Thank you so much for the information. We greatly appreciate it, and thanks for coming down and speaking to us today.